everybody, this is Josh Runquist here. Time for another Backwards Marathon, and it's time to talk about another one of my favorite bands of all time, Nevermore. Nevermore, of course, came from the ashes of Sanctuary, and became one of the leading names in progressive metal, thrash metal, and dark metal, and just those slightest tinges of power metal that make it all work so very well. Of course, with only 7 albums to their name, I should be able to get this done pretty quickly, but I'm going to start things off talking about the album that you see right there where it says doesn't count. That is the EP In Memory. The reason I say it doesn't count is because, of course, I only cover studio LPs in this list. Otherwise, when it comes to other bands, the list will go on for hours, and I just don't want to put in that much effort. And I don't think anyone's going to watch that long, so even if a band only has one EP like Nevermore does, I'm still counting it as something that's not going to count for this list. Although I will say I really do appreciate what this does, and it really does start to feel like Nevermore when you listen to this EP because it comes right into the politics of ecstasy. But let's get things going right away with the self-titled album, which came out all the way back in 1995. I can't believe that was 28 years ago that the first Nevermore album came out. But with all that said, this is the album that sounds closest to Sanctuary. You can especially hear it in Whirl's vocals. Especially on a song like CBF, you can really hear the falsettos that are coming through, and it does remind you so much of Sanctuary. But there's other elements on this album that you really do start to hear the beginning of Nevermore, and of course that is the case, it's the debut album. But the band was still trying to find out what kind of sound that they were going for. And you can hear the dark moments that are going on, you can hear more of the double bass that's going on, a little bit more of the down tuning compared to Sanctuary, but it does sound a lot like Sanctuary, but just darker. And it is a really fun album to be able to go back to. I know some of the Nevermore diehards may not listen to this one as much because it is, again, a lot like Sanctuary, but I think it's an album that's absolutely worth going back to and checking out. And I really can't find anything wrong with it other than I think that it's just, the first album. And I think they only got better as a whole continuing forward. So yeah, I'm giving this one a B. The Politics of Ecstasy comes up next in 1996, and this is an album where you really start to feel the band starting to come into their own. The lyrics are even darker than Sanctuary was, and much darker than even the Nevermore self-titled was. Jeff Loomis is, of course, putting out some killer solos. Van Williams is on this album all the way through from start to finish, where he only plays on a few tracks on the self-titled, and this really feels like the first real, true Nevermore album. I guess the easiest way to put this is Nevermore in the depths of their 6-string era, and it's not something to ignore. I know a lot of people don't listen to anything before Dead Heart and A Dead World, and you're wrong for doing so because you're missing out on 3 killer albums, and The Politics of Ecstasy is an excellent example of that. It is a fantastic album with very poignant lyrics, really good production for 1996 for an upstart band like Nevermore, and the band is just killer on this album. And it's another album that I really feel belongs to be a B. A couple years later, we get Dreaming Neon Black, the last album of the 6-string era, and potentially the darkest Nevermore album. And it's so weird to say that because, a lot of people think, dark is just musical. It's not so much the lyrics, and you are wrong for thinking so, because this album is absolutely batshit insane. To give the Cliff Notes version of all this, it is a concept album that is loosely wrapped around real-life events from Warl Dane, where his ex-partner left and never came back to him and joined a cult. Now, that's where the similarities end. As in the story, everyone starts going batshit insane, everyone dies, it's a happy ending, it's a Nevermore album. And of course, the real-life events are even sadder than you might think that they are. I'll let you look those up for yourself because we're here just talking about the album. And for the last album in the 6-string era, it is my favorite album of the 6-string era. The songs are so dark, so poignant. Worrell's vocals are just getting stronger and stronger, not having to rely on the falsettos all the time. Of course, Jeff Loomis with his absolutely insane solos. Van Williams continues to be one of the most underrated drummers of all time, and he just keeps getting stronger and stronger with every Nevermore release. And Dreaming Neon Black is just that culmination of all of that. And it's just absolutely killer, no pun intended. And it's something that I absolutely have to give an A. And I'll say it again, go back and listen to the first 3 Nevermore albums. Yes, they are 6-string, yes, they're a little lighter on the production, yes, they're not Dead Heart in a Dead World. But they are absolutely worth your attention because they are that good. Following that up, we have the legendary album from 2000, and yeah, I mean, it's fair to say, I know some people might not agree, I know a couple people who don't agree, or at least I used to know people who don't agree. Wink wink, nudge nudge. This is 2000's Dead Heart in a Dead World, and it is the best Nevermore album. It is the first album of the 7-string guitar era. This has some of the best production the band has ever put out. This has some of the best songs the band has ever put out, and some of the finest musicianship you will ever hear. Whether they're doing their own original songs or covering Simon and Garfunkel, well before Disturbed did it, and did it much, much better than Disturbed. Nevermore just put out one of the darkest albums of the 21st century, and they did it the very first year of the 21st century, or the last year of the 20th century if you're one of those people. Perfect production, perfect songwriting, killer musicianship, and of course the legendary vocals of Worrell Dane. And there's no reason to give this anything other than an S. In 2003 comes the most controversial Nevermore album with Enemies of Reality. Now, why is this one so controversial? It all came down to the production. The production on here, I don't know the real backstory of what happened. I've heard so many different things. I've heard insider talk about what happened. There's the Wikipedia stuff that's out there. There's people's just opinions on what happened, but basically the production is pretty subpar. And especially after you release something like Dead Heart in a Dead World, that feels like a punch in the gut. Thankfully, the album has been remixed and remastered, and sounds so much better. This album now gets the love and appreciation that it does deserve, although some diehards will never really truly give this album the benefit of the doubt. But there's some great songs on this album that are worth your attention. The songwriting is just mind-blowing on this album. Jeff Loomis does some of his best solos on this album. And Van Williams, again, just becomes more and more comfortable with every subsequent Nevermore album, and just unleashes some of the most killer fills in the whole Nevermore discography. While it is probably my least favorite of the 7-string era, I think it is still more than worthy of being a B. This godless endeavor. In 2005, this album just simply rules, and it's almost kind of the breakout album for Nevermore. Which is so weird to say because Dead Heart in a Dead World was so critically acclaimed. This is where I started to notice that bands, musicians, everywhere around the world, people were starting to pay attention to Nevermore. And there's a good reason for that, whether you got the title track, whether you got Psalms of Lydia. There's so many good songs on this album. And it is a course correction from Enemies of Reality, because the production on here is so perfect. The songwriting is a little more streamlined, which is not a bad thing. It's one of the most legendary album covers of all time. I mean, I actually have the t-shirt for this godless endeavor. And this is where the band started to get on some gigantic tours, like Gigantour. No pun intended. Who am I kidding? There was pun intended all over the place for that one. But yeah, I mean, of course, this is where I started to pay attention to Nevermore because I saw everyone else talking about Nevermore from this album. And it really does live up to everything. It's so good. And I love the fact that this album still holds up to this day. And while many people might not say that this is the best Nevermore album, I still hold it in very high regard, and yeah, I'm going to give this one an A. And then finally, in 2010, The Obsidian Conspiracy, the album that killed the band. I guess there's no real other way to say it. I mean, they were able to tour behind this album, but they were going to be doing a subsequent tour, and everything just fell apart. And this is the one and only time I got to see Nevermore live was on Halloween 2010. One of the best shows I've ever seen in my entire life. Worrell Dane was dressed up as a pirate. Jeff Loomis was, Yeah, he was a hot dog. Van Williams was a banana. I forgot what Jeff was, but it was a great, great show. Other stories that I have to keep on the down low about that show, but it was a great time. But when it comes to this album, this is the most mainstream sounding Nevermore album, and it was done by design. I mean, it was basically Nevermore saying, hey, we need to make more money, we need to make songs that are more mainstream and commercial. And I think they did it in a way that didn't have them sell out. It really does sound like the band just wanting to do something a little less technical, a little less progressive, but that does not mean that there's not technicality and progressive prowess throughout this entire thing. It is all here in strides. And it's funny because you start off so strong, and then you start getting into more ballad territory, you start getting some more dark, demented territory throughout, and then you end arguably one of the band's greatest songs, the self-titled song, The Obsidian Conspiracy. And depending on the version that you have, it technically ends on The Crystal Ship by The Doors, which is funny because that's also the last song that Sanctuary put out with Warl Dane. Well, not the same song, same band, The Doors. And it's just so strange to think about that. And of course, you know, when you hear this album with Nevermore, in the last words of the last original song, these are my last words. I can't sing like Warl, you can't sing like Warl, so I'm not even gonna try. But the fact that those were the last words of Nevermore, and for some people the last time they ever heard anything from Warl Dane because they don't like Sanctuary and never gave him a chance, that is dark. I mean, it's just one of those things that you don't really expect, especially considering, you know, the passing of Warl Dane. I will say a lot of people do crap on this album because of the fact that it is more streamlined, it is more mainstream, it is more straight ahead, but honestly, it's my second favorite Nevermore album. I love this thing from start to finish. I love every song on here. Even the songs I didn't like at the time, I thoroughly, thoroughly appreciate now. And there's songs on here that really strike a chord with me, with what I've had to deal with in my own life. It seems like Warl and I had a kinship, even though he only met me once, and I got to interview him on the final Sanctuary tour. The last time he ever got to play Minnesota, so many memories come along with that, but it's just hard to believe that it's been that long. But yeah, I hold this album in such high regard. I think it's every bit as good as Dead Heart in a Dead World. It just doesn't get the appreciation that it deserves. It's a little bit different, but that's all it needs to be. And controversial take, but it's my take, so suck it. I'm giving this an S. Give me just a couple seconds to rearrange a couple things. I'll be right back. And we're back. And I only had to make a couple changes here because there isn't much that I really needed to change about here. So again, let's get right into it. From the bottom down here doesn't really count, but I still think you should check it out. It is their lone EP, In Memory. And there's nothing that's a C because everything is B tier or higher. Starting off the B tier at the bottom, now we're here, is the self-titled album, followed by Enemies of Reality. And then, of course, topping off the B tier is The Politics of Ecstasy. In the A tier, we have Dreaming Neon Black, my favorite of the six-string era, and then This Godless Endeavor. And of course, in the S tier, the controversial take of The Obsidian Conspiracy, and of course, the non-controversial take of the best Nevermore album, 2000's Dead Heart in a Dead World. And there you go, folks. The Backwards Marathon for this week is Nevermore. If you like your dark metal, if you like progressive, thrash, power, almost doom, almost black metal at times, Nevermore has all of that in strides. And of course, the last album having a little bit of mainstream rock appeal that you might enjoy if you want to be able to get into Nevermore. I love this band to death. I love Warl Dane, one of my absolute favorite singers of all time. It was an absolute honor to be able to interview him. And if you go back on this very channel, you should go check out that interview where we talk about the then brand new Sanctuary album. I know the band's continuing on, which I have mixed feelings about, but hey, I'm not in the band. If you like this list, if you don't like this list, or if you just want to give me your own list, or give me crap for my own personal opinion, drop your opinions down below and let me know what you think. And until the next Backwards Marathon, next top 10 list, interview, review, or anything else that I put up here on the Heavy Debriefings YouTube channel. For Heavy Debriefings, like, comment, share, and subscribe. This is Josh Runquist saying, See ya.